Hi everybody, my name is Neil Maccormack and welcome to my LightWave 3D tutorial for rendering an external scene, lighting an external scene, modeling an external scene, and bringing the render into Photoshop to do some post-production work. So here's the image that we're going to be it's our final render, and we're going to take you through the process of producing this image, lighting it, doing some finishing touches in Photoshop, and there you go. So we're going to actually reverse engineer this image because it's just a short tutorial, so it might be a bit easier to do it that way. So let's get started. Here's the LightWave scene that you can see. And one of the first things we need, well, you can see the 3D objects of the land, you can see the background and everything. And let's start up initially with the background. So one of the first things I would do when creating a scene like this is to create a background map. So what I've done with this is use this image, the sky image, as my background, and this will then become our light source. Let's just have a look at that image in Photoshop. And you can see my PSD file. Okay, so this is basically our sky map. We have our clouds, we have our fog and mist at the bottom here, just some basic colors of earth tones at the bottom, our horizon, and the clouds and the light source. So we're gonna, this is quite a high res image, a print res image really. I would normally work in these kind of numbers for simplicity's sake if I need to do anything high res. So then we'll take this image and bring it into LightWave through the image editor, and we will set our camera to be the same dimensions as the image. So that's the first thing. So your image that you bring in will denote and set to the same image. And as you can see, I'm using it as my background image. Set that first of all in the compositing effects tab, and then let's just close that one down, and then we'll set up, let's just set up our camera using a real lens camera, and let's set the camera to be exactly the same resolution as the image that we brought in. So we're setting it exactly the same ratio, not really touching anything else, just that way the camera isn't distorting the image and everything will be the same rendered out. So then the next job is to line up the camera really with our image. As you can see, I've got my grid turned on and my horizon on the grid is meeting the horizon of the image. So if we had that any other way, that it would look, the perspective would not look correct on the final render. So let's just check the properties of the camera. I'm just choosing standard Canon lens, and doesn't really matter, to be honest, with this unless you need it for something specific, but I use the 10D and the Canon SLR. So normally that's for pre-photoed stuff or if you're move matching anything, but this time no. So then let's have a look what we've got. We've positioned I would use one light for the source, that being this to represent the sun, and I've turned on the render globals and the global illumination, and I've set the light intensity to about 50%, and I pick a light color from, in this useful little thing here, I will pick it straight off the sky image, so that way the light that's coming from our light source will match the light source that we've chosen for our sky map. So with those things in place, we can add our global illumination light probe image, which is again the background image. So this way everything's in tune with what we set up. So we've got our light source, our sky map, and our global illumination all doing exactly the same thing and all coming from the same light. So the tone of the image and the light of the image will match what we have in our sky map. And it's these three elements which you can take into any outdoor scene. Those are the most important ones. we've got our render options all set to how we want them for producing a scene like this. We've turned off the ambient intensity of the light. We don't want any of that. And volumetrics we've enabled and set to realistic and use backdrop color. So what will happen with that is that anything that's composited into the fog will take on the color and tones of the sky map image. That will become our fog rather than setting a different color. So volumetrics, the light source, the light color, and the compositing will all define how the image will look when it's rendered. So for the objects, we've got a ground plane, basically, cloned 8 times. The ground plane is a relatively basic model, i.e. it being a flat square. Let me just show you that. I think we'll switch over to Modeler and I'll show you the actual object. There you go. So it's just a flat plane which has been subdivided quite a few times, and then you can go. Let's go into polygons. Did we see that? Okay, so 65,000 polygons and then subpatched. The reason I subpatched it is because we're going to use a deformation map, and those deformations will look a lot better if the object is subpatched. So if we look at the object properties, our deformation map, and let's just switch that so we can see the objects in real time, is 2 images. So the first one is black and white image, which will give the overall sort of undulation of the ground plane. And I've chosen this map, which is one in my library. And then the second one we've got will create some sand sort of dune effect, which we put as an additive layer on this one. And with those two together, you get quite a nice deformation to produce the ground plane. So with each cloned ground plane, I have adjusted slightly the deformations and the amplitude of them, and there you can see what happens if we put it up, what happens if we put it down. And it's just a question of playing around with this until you're happy with what you see, and that looks to be okay to me. And then each one is cloned and just tweaked slightly just to set up how I want it to be. So then we've got the 3 larger ground planes in the distance. Again, all clones of the first one. And again, just tweaked a little slightly differently so we can just get a little bit of randomness in there, and the hills right at the back, so it's to blend into where the fog and stuff might be to make it a bit more realistic. So yeah, the modeling is really quite basic. Surfacing again is really not very technical. This is just for a still image. If we were approaching this and wanting to animate stuff, we might approach it slightly differently, but this is just for a little conceptual stuff. So basic stuff on the texturing there, a little bit of specularity to catch the sun. Color maps are really just tweaking and nothing special. We've got our front projection of our sky map, so those earthy tones at the bottom of the sky map will come through onto our ground objects, which gives a little bit of realism. I've got a picture of some rocky cliffs here, which I've added on. They're just 27% in a planar texture, and then this sort of grassy, sandy image again added on as the 3rd layer. So this is, as we're reverse engineering the scene, you have to go through this and tweak and just see what works, see what doesn't work, the scale, whether it's cubic or planar or you want to UV map stuff. It's a process that you have to go through and test and see what works for you. Really, this is how I ended up doing it. So this is kind of how we look. So really nothing too major on because we've got the deformations. There's no point really adding a bump map either. So okay, so let's render out some stuff. I'm going to render at 50% just to make it a bit simpler and a bit quicker. And then we'll take it into Photoshop and finish it up a little bit. Okay, so there's our final render, which looks pretty nice. We've got our fog fading in there nicely and sky map looking good. Let's just so you can see that. Sun glinting off the sands there, which again adds a little bit more realism. So I think with that, we're going to be quite happy. So not much more tweaking needed on that, I don't think. We can see the light source. We can see where the sun is shining from. And yeah, I think we're good with that. So let's move into Photoshop and we can open up our render. There we go. And what I'm going to do is bring it into an existing render that I did, which has some extra layers added into it. So this is our final render, as you can see. And I've got 3 extra layers on there. So that's the original render from Photoshop. And then above that, let's get rid of that one. And then what we're going to do is sharpen it. And then we'll add some noise as well. There's 2 things I always do with every image that I do: sharpen and noise, in that order, just to give it a sort of grainier, photographed feel to it. Second one I've got here, which I think, yeah, it's the brightness contrast. So that's just a little boost of the colors, just to sort of give it a bit more effect there. And then the one above that is our final sort of retouching. We've got 4 or 5 layers in there, adjustment layers of curves, brightness, color balance, vibrance, hue, this kind of stuff. And these are 5 different layers, which I choose to put on each image. Again, I just transfer them from render to render to render to render. So it's a process of going through, tweaking the colors slightly, see what works for you, see what doesn't work, see how you like it, see if you think that the colors need an extra boost. I like to reduce the saturation in my images a little bit. Again, try to give them a bit more of a photographed feel and trying to make them a little bit grainier than the actual render that comes out of LightWave. And with them being in a folder, they can be tweaked or they can be removed or added however you want, really. So the original render is still there in its same format. So just for a last touch, we'll duplicate that, and we will do a little blur just to create some wind, little motion blur. Okay, so that looks a little bit quick. Let's change that to lighten, and you can see it's creating an effect of the wind sort of coming across the sand, and there it is, off and on. And you can see that it just makes the image a bit smoother. I'll take a smudging brush here as well, and we'll smudge out some of that one looks interesting. Let's try that one. We'll smudge out something on go back to the original render and just smooth out some of the little rougher parts of the original render that maybe needs a bit more. And again, just trying to give it an effect of the wind blowing across and blowing up and over, and just some environmental elements which just add a little touch of realism into the image. So let's just go through that and add a bit in the sky as well, maybe, just to give it a slightly painterly feel as well, which I like to do on my renders, and just to really finish them off. So because it's easier to do this post-production than to do it in LightWave, but like I said, as this is a still image, we can do this here without worrying about having to go back and then reproduce that, because in LightWave to do these kind of things would be very technical and very difficult. So let's use the dodge tool here just to highlight some of the lighter areas of the image, just to give a bit more effect to the sun, just so you can really sort of catch the highlights on the dunes. That's really what we're after. Not much, maybe. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're almost done. Let's save that, and then let's show. Can we do that? Anyway, there's our final image. That's basically pretty simple ground objects, some basic lighting, global illumination, and a little bit of retouching in Photoshop. Thanks very much.